Hey, welcome back to the show. Last episode, Courtney and I covered compassionate neutrality, how to implement it, and why that's easier said than done. But this time, we're helping you reground yourself in reality after coming to terms with your involvement in the drama triangle. Stay tuned. Listener note: this episode contains content that may be upsetting to some audiences. If you're sensitive to mentions of domestic violence, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, familicide, or spousal abuse, please exercise caution when listening.
Hello, welcome back to the No Divorce Drama podcast. I'm Courtney Fields, licensed clinical social worker, and with me as always is...
I'm Liv. I'm not a licensed clinical social worker. I do work for Courtney, so that's really cool. Learned a lot. It's great. I am also very well versed in the specific cycle that we talk about here in the drama triangle. So those are my
so since last time you basically got a promotion. Liv has now not only, like, she doesn't help with all of our social media and podcasts, but she's now our intake and outreach coordinator at our mother organization, which is the Divorce Resource Center of Georgia. And even to work in that organization, just to answer the phone, you need to know how to avoid being pulled into a drama triangle.
Yeah, I mean, and just responding to emails.
Even emails, yeah. So we get practice every day on this. So if you feel like after you've heard the first 3 episodes that you're not there yet, do not beat up on yourself. It does require a lot of practice, but if you're like us and you do it day in and day out, you either sink or swim. So we prefer to swim and practice swimming and just keep swimming, as Dory would say. Just keep swimming. Actually, I have a t-shirt that says that.
Oh, that's amazing. I need a t-shirt that says that. I can make
so happy belated Valentine's Day. I'm drinking out of my heart Life is Good mug. Amazing. I love Life is Good. My mug says, do what you like what you do. That's a life goal that I feel like I can check off. So I want to start by sharing, just I say happy Valentine's Day. There was a time that I would not have said that to anyone. That time was my 20s. That was my single girl years. And I hope you did not go out to dinner on actual Valentine's Day, because it is the longest wait time of the year in all restaurants. And the reason is because everyone comes in twos. So if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know that Valentine's Day is insane because, come on, people, just for the restaurant industry, go on some more double dates on Valentine's Day, triple date it, help everyone out. There's your public service announcement for the day. But yeah, back in the day, I worked at Chili's and I would dress all in black on Valentine's Day. But then I want to give a shout out to my dad real quick. My dad was real good about sending me a card and what I called pity money every Valentine's Day during those single girl years. So thanks, Dad.
I love it. They weren't just your single girl years, from what it sounds like. They were your edgy girl years, wearing all black on Valentine's Day. It's a real.
Well, I mean, I always do kind of like to intentionally choose to go against the flow.
You know what? So do I.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even from an early age, literally the only reason that I did not drink in high school was because everyone else was. There was no morals. There was no, I'm scared to be an alcoholic. Nothing. It was just, I'm just going to take inventory statistically who all's doing this. Don't want to be a statistic.
All right, I'm good. I'll pass.
I do appreciate that mentality, because I learned to have lots and lots of fun sober, where, to the point that other people just assumed I was trash. Nope. Just a lot of silliness. As I drink my wine now as an adult in my Valentine's Day Life is Good mug.
I am drinking a lot of liquid IV out of my rainbow. I think this actually was Pride merch. Yeah, it was from Target. I don't know
Oh,
why,
nice.
but I got this. It's my favorite. It keeps drinks very cold. I really love
Mine's from the thrift store.
it.
I have a thrift store problem.
I love it. I love the thrift store.
Listen, I used to consign kids' clothes for a long time. I'm just gonna be a little like get off the subject just real quick, but so I have this theory about thrifting, and I'm just gonna be a little stereotypical about the gender, so just forgive me for that. But so if we just like categorize men as liking, they like to hunt, especially we live in Georgia, so lots of hunting. If you're married to a hunter, when deer season is, when dove season is, all the seasons, because you also know that you will not have any help with the children on the weekends of those seasons. And so, but also when you think about, even if you're getting your own meat from the deer that you get, the amount of time and investment that you make in that, if you were actually at work that day, you would probably make enough money to not have to hunt, but that's not the thrill of it, right? So the thrill, it's the same thing with consigning. Like I used to volunteer to be a consigner, so I could be the first one there. And it was the thrill of the hunt that drew me there. And it was like, and so it was kind of addictive in that way. It was very cost prohibitive. There was nothing efficient about the amount of time I volunteered at consignment sales. So since I don't do sales as much anymore, I hit the thrift store a lot because I drive by and I'm like, there could be a treasure there that I
have to
don't have.
And
Yeah.
what if I miss out on it?
It is total FOMO. I have thrift store FOMO.
So do I. It's a problem. I do it all the time.
It's a problem.
I got a pair of pants. They're so cute. They're plaid. They're like a faux tweed. They're so freaking cute. I love them.
Yeah.
Looked at them. I was like, these are cute. Looked at the size. They're like a size 6. I'm like, all right. I'm a size 8. I'll squeeze.
That's what Spanx are for.
Yeah.
Go down a size with Spanx.
There ain't no way they're getting over the thighs. It ain't going to happen with Spanx.
That is the drawback of the thrift store, but I just donate it back.
Yeah.
If it's an impulse purchase, it work out.
Oh, no,
and I'm doing good for the world. So yay me. So anyway, Valentine's Day was this week. You may have had mixed feelings about it. Since I became a parent, I choose to focus on my children as my Valentines because I don't get any more pity money from my dad anymore. And so I can't budget that.
And you made a very cute post with one of your daughters for Valentine's Day.
I did, yes.
Very cute. And it was like kind of for Valentine's Day, but it also was centered not on like, obviously it featured your daughter, so not romantic love, but talk about that post because I liked it a lot. I thought it was
I said the greatest love story is the one with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that really came from just some like a little emotional journey I've been on lately. I am divorced, as our audience may know, and it's been a few years, but grief comes in waves, and I had a wave of grief come this week. And normally, even in my marriage, I was like, our first Valentine's Day dating, I was like, look, dude, I am not into this holiday. It's a scam by Hallmark. So no offense to Hallmark, but I just wasn't into it because I also at the time just wasn't real hopeful about ever finding anybody. But even after my divorce, I reconnected with like an old flame. And there's so much nostalgia about old flames. And I love the movie The Notebook, but I love it a little too much. Like that could be someone's reality. And sometimes my optimism takes a detour from realism as well. So I was kind of mourning a lot. I was feeling kind of grieving a lot. And I knew it wasn't the person. It wasn't the person I was married to. It wasn't the person that was the old flame. I kind of had this aha where I realized I was mourning my love story. Like, am I going to get one? Those don't feel like my love stories anymore. the further away and get from, mourning those specific relationships. So that was just kind of something I was thinking about and processing this week and just the week leading up to Valentine's Day. So that was really the inspiration for the post about the greatest love story is the one with yourself, because that's just what I've learned so much in my healing journey from divorce has been, you can't give to others what you can't give to yourself.
Yeah, that's a really big thing. It's something that I tell a lot of friends. I've talked before on here about how I have somehow have become me, chronically single, has become like the person in my friend group that people go to talk about their relationships or issues that they're having. And so much of it ends up centered around this like idea that I think is very toxic, the way that it's kind of been adapted now, of like constantly seeking validation from your romantic partner and wanting to do things solely to get that validation instead of it being something that like you genuinely enjoy doing and it happens to be something that you can do together. The amount of times that I've had to like mention to friends, they'll be like, oh, I want to go to the gym more because, my boyfriend goes to the gym and he really loves to do that. And I've been meaning to do it anyways. And so I'm going to go because, I think he would be excited about it. And I'm like, I think if you want to go to the gym, then you should do it for yourself. And if it's something that you're doing specifically for your partner, you should maybe rethink that. And they never like understand why I'm like have an issue with that. I'm like, I don't have an issue with you specifically doing something, like to make your partner's day or like something special for them that maybe you're not, super into. But when it's things like that, like when you're actively making choices about your life and like your day-to-day habits to please your partner, like that's not love.
Well, and I had an issue too, like even though I was single in my 20s, I had kind of like identified a love story for myself of a person that I wasn't necessarily with. Like it was like an off and on non-committal thing for a really long time. But in the back of my mind, it was always like, oh, but this could turn into the love story that I imagined. So even during like really singleton days, I remember thinking about, well, what would he think of this? For when we reconnect again.
Yeah. And I think I think that's such a common like thing that happens that a lot of people just don't like talk about. It's, I think it's because part of it also is, when you are like separated from that, you're away from that specific person, you feel kind of embarrassed. Like I did all of that for this person that I wasn't even like actually in a committed relationship with, like, and you feel, and so
don't get me started, but I'm going to pause you there, Liv, because I want you and everyone else to know I've got a little bit of more life experience in this area, but let's just let go of that embarrassment. Like let's just show so much compassion to yourself that it's like, okay, I did that. Lesson learned, maybe. Lesson almost learned, good enough.
Yeah. For now, it's learned. We'll see if I remember it down the line, but that's fine. Like it's really easy to get like caught up in that like sense of embarrassment, but it's a really common thing. Like a lot of people do it, and it's my absolute queen. I would do anything for this woman, Miss Taylor Swift. She she has so many songs, and she's written specifically on her 1989 album, the song Style. In interviews, when people ask her, because they love to ask her, well, who is this about? And she's like, I'm not going to answer that question. Stop asking me that. It's so weird.
Look, I'm a 45-year-old divorcee, and Taylor Swift songs got me through the first year of my divorce.
Yes. Like,
Tay-Tay's got it covered with a lot of universal experiences. And speaking of music, we put together a playlist on Spotify.
So excited about it.
I know, it's so much fun because music was such an important part of my healing process. Like when you can't sit still and the thoughts just won't stop, you've now got a playlist that you can turn to. You've got a no divorce drama playlist on Spotify.
Yeah.
And I would love for folks to send their suggestions of their own, like, you know,
absolutely.
their own songs that tug their heartstrings during a difficult time. And I will add it on there. So just let us know.
And I'm working on adding my own list of songs too. So
Awesome.
it's gonna be great.
It's pretty eclectic. I'm kind of all over the place with my
nice.
music interest. But it is heavy on Taylor Swift because she is an old, wise soul. And we just adore her.
My girl. I love her.
Yeah.
I love her. I love specifically what she says about style in interviews where she'll say, she says, like, I think we all have that person who, like, at the end of the day, if they call, like, we're gonna pick up the phone. We all have a person like that. And I heard that and I just was like, she gets it. Like, yes, she
just like pays attention, like that's the thing is that's why she gets it, because she pays attention. And I think it's great that from an early age she learned to cope through music, because she walks through her pain and then she comes out on the other side instead of avoiding it. So that's part of why she's she has so much wisdom about relationships.
She processes grief and heartbreak very, very well, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of processing and identifying all the nuance in everything that comes with heartbreak and grief and trying to move on.
Yeah, well, we're going to take it a step further. So, kind of like thinking back to what I was sharing about the love story. Mm-hmm. That's a reason that a lot of people come together in the first place. And the greater the sparks, the greater the chemistry, no matter how soon you feel it, like is probably sending like neuro pathways or neurons to someone's brains. Like, this is probably my love story, and the greater the need that you have for that in your life, the more susceptible you are to what we're going to talk about today, which is being in a relationship where there is psychological abuse occurring.
Yeah.
So, it's a heavy topic. We're going to hit the highlights. Some of what we share maybe feel triggering. So definitely keep in mind that the information coming, depending on where you're at in your journey or how much this applies to you or how much, support you have in your life, whether it's therapeutic or just family and friends. This psychological abuse that we're going to start with is the depths of cruelty that it can get to is frightening.
It is. Definitely, consider it from this point forward. If you're not in the space to hear about these things, to hear us talk about these things, to consider them for yourself, proceed with caution. Take a break from this episode. That's okay. We're gonna be here whenever
we'll be here when you come back. Yeah.
It's fine.
And also maybe you want to time it and listen to it the same day you're going to see your therapist. Watch it with a friend. There's all kinds of extra kind of layers of protection you can surround yourself with so that you can listen to it. It's no different than the fact that when I did try to watch horror movies, I did give up on that. I watched them during the day. Side note, that does not work.
No, it does not. No,
it doesn't work.
Because then it gets to like mid-afternoon when it's kind of like dim.
It doesn't matter. It just gets into my psyche. I cannot handle horror movies.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Weirdly, I can handle like documentaries about true story hauntings, no problem.
That's so funny.
But a fantastical horror movie, I am not equipped to deal with. It's one of those things in life that I just am not going to ask why. I'm just going to accept it as it is.
I think that's understandable. That is understandable.
So let's replace love story with the term love bombing.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'm
so This is a phrase that thankfully is more and more common, but I want to explain what it is.
Yes.
So if you think about the evolution of, let's just say, learning to trust your new teacher. Okay, let's say you're in high school, it's a new year, you got a new teacher in one of your classes. Let's say they're brand new and nobody knows this teacher, so nobody knows what this teacher's like. You're probably not going to go in there with the assumption that this teacher is freaking awesome and that you're totally going to get an A in the class and it's the best teacher you've ever had, right? You're going to take kind of like a wait and see approach, right? You're probably going to talk to some people like who also have that teacher and be like, what was your experience like? It would be really weird if like your friend suddenly turns to you the first day of class with that teacher and says, I am so excited this teacher is going to be the best teacher we ever had. Your friend probably be like, I don't know how you know that, but I ain't buying it yet. And so that's funny how that's normal. But when we think about like a partner for the rest of our lives or someone we're going to be like 1,000% vulnerable with, we do not think that way. No. We, depending on how maybe unmet our own needs are, and remind me, I have a great handout that I want to attach to the notes of this, Liv. That's just a handout on basic needs and feelings, because that's what we're kind of talking about when I talk about unmet needs. We all have like a universal set of needs. And there may be some that through neglect in childhood or just other types of emotional wounds from childhood just really, really went unmet to the point where as an adult, it feels like a super, super important need more so than all the others. But that's usually because we're operating from a deficit to begin with. And what ends up happening is that need actually ends up being like a black hole. It will never be fully met. It just goes on and on and on. And so I say that to say that someone that may have that in their life might be more susceptible to seeing quicker than normal kind of devotions and promises of love and fidelity and all that kind of stuff as normal because it feels really good. There's no skepticism whatsoever. And that's why when you are like dating or in the beginning of a relationship, you want to proceed with caution with immediate chemistry. I feel like in a way, I feel like I'm like the opposite of Cupid right now, like busting everyone's like putting pins in everyone's Valentine's balloons right now.
Like,
but that's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying that there's there's a process.
Yeah.
And the process, it's fine to feel that chemistry, but it's not fine to immediately give that person trust as well. That's a different relationship dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that especially when you're talking about the drama triangle and the roles, the rescuer and victim roles, which we've talked in the past, is how a lot of relationships start because it's a very positive feeling. That's also what I'm describing. And a lot of times it's actually two people with those same kinds of black holes that are coming together. But anyone with unresolved trauma or childhood wounds, there's kind of at some point in that unhealed journey that there's a fork in the road. And that fork in the road usually ends up being, and I'm not going to get into why, I don't really know why, but you usually have the same kinds of issue lead to that fork in the road where one person goes towards externalizing behaviors and one person goes more to internalizing behaviors. And another way to look at that is one person may go towards manipulative behavior to control others, and the other person may go towards something like codependency.
This is something I talk about so often with friends, specifically with friends who are, very interested in mental health and psychological abuse, these kinds of cycles and the way that they happen. I talk about, and that's the phrase I use, is like, I say there's a fork in the road, like there's a fork in the road, or I will say there comes to a point where there's a choice that essentially has to be made. And it's not necessarily a conscious choice.
Right.
It has to be made either you see what the problem is and you deal with it in whatever ways you know to, so you don't hurt people, or you don't. And that's where the fork is.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's the same root source. It's the same behavior, but it's that fork where it splits. And that's what confuses so many people. It's
well,
like,
and just because it's a different recipe or different list of ingredients as to what may influence a person to go either way in the fork, how much support they have, how much stability they have in their family, how much access they have to mental health services, what their family's culture, what their culture believes about mental health. I mean, we could go on and have a whole, 8 podcasts on those types of variables. Just a quick example, I've got 2 friends from high school, and both had struggled with similar issues when it came to like drugs and alcohol. But one of them basically, went on a path of hurting others, and the other went on a path of hurting themselves. And one is still hurting others, and one is no longer hurting themselves. And some of the main differences there were, what their support system looked like, what some of the values they were raised upon, and also just maybe like some personality characteristics. So there's just a lot that goes into the whys, but the whys aren't as important as knowing that it's kind of different sides to the same coin.
Yeah, it's the, we do our best to not use labels, and that's because, one, labels can be extremely stigmatized, but also just because the behaviors are what the behaviors are, and at the end of the day, the label itself isn't really what like confirms that. Like, if the behaviors are there, calling somebody a narcissist doesn't like confirm the behaviors were there.
It's not gonna fix it, that's for sure.
It change anything. Like, so the label is kind of,
I mean, it's definitely helpful when you're Googling what you're dealing with.
Yes. And then it,
Google the label.
But that gets said a lot about narcissists and people who have the fawn response in they have a fawn trauma response as opposed to, anything else, which you and I have talked before about how that's not totally how trauma responses work, but we'll get into that in another episode, because that could be a whole on its own.
And a fawn response can also look like adapting to that person's preferences in the relationship, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And so it's 2 sides to the same coin. Like, it's the same, if not very similar behaviors, but for completely different reasons. And that's where it's like so confusing for so many people, because they're like, okay, like, but I'm doing that too. Like, I do the passive aggressiveness, I do the like emotional outbursts, I do all of those things too. So does that make me a narcissist? And it's like, no.
Right. And so we're going to talk about why that's not the case, because when we talk about psychological abuse, there's also something called reactive abuse in a relationship. So we'll get to that. So remind me if I don't bring it up again.
Talking about abuse. Yeah. Like, these are things that don't get talked about. And when they do get talked about, the way like I call it like the TikTokification of mental health, where they become buzzwords and people are not using them correctly. And that has specifically happened with words like gaslight, like narcissism, like abuse, like.
Well, and there's no full circle moment for that either. So it's like, okay, I've identified it, but that's just, that's a baby step.
It's just a label
in terms of what else there is to do. So I want to just get some definitions right now, because we're talking about psychological abuse. And I'm going to put it out there that is different from what we have historically called emotional abuse, or I would even make the distinction between verbal abuse. Okay.
Mm.
So defining physical abuse, defining sexual abuse for the most part is understood well enough. But when you talk about emotional, verbal, mental, psychological, I want to make some differentiation here. So when we talk about like emotional abuse, and I'm going to categorize like that emotional / verbal, typically that looks like name calling. That looks like someone whose motive is to make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So lower your self-esteem, and the benefit to that other person is that, you become more dependent on them. They feel like they have more control over you. Okay. So if they're super jealous, if they make you think you're not attractive, then they feel like they've prevented you from cheating on them. All right. So, but if we take psychological abuse goes to a whole new level. And this is the level where I would say, let's say physical and emotional abuse affects your mind and body. A way to look at it is that psychological abuse is going after your spirit. It's going after your core, your soul, what your center, whatever you want to call it. But the part of you that is much less tangible, that maybe you're not real connected to either. And it's kind of like it's the ultimate form of control. So I would say like the greater need for a person to be in control, if they're more have those externalizing behaviors, they're going to be trying to manipulate others through psychological abuse. Okay. I would go so far to say that the effects of it on a person are worse than all the other forms.
Yeah.
I really do truly believe it is the cruelest and most insidious form of abuse that someone can experience in a relationship.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is just, it's, what you had said, that it's going after your spirit, your soul. The way I like to, kind of phrase it or think about it is it's attacking your sense of self. It's
Yes.
like I mean, that's such a huge thing. That is such a critical part of you as a person, is your sense of self. And
Yeah, it is everything about you.
everything. So
And without it, guess how you're going to feel? If you lose your sense of self, you're going to feel like you want to die.
Yeah.
That's how bad and how, insidious this is.
Yeah.
So making that disclaimer, as we talk about psychological abuse, I want you to think about it in that light. So now, whereas some of the behaviors that we consider to be psychological abuse may have some overlap with some of the effects of the other forms of abuse, let's just think about it in terms of severity in the form that it takes, and severity in the consequences.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the need to feel in control, which is a common, heightened need when someone has unhealed trauma or childhood wounds, because in childhood, to raise healthy children, we want them to have, really well-developed sense of self. And with any kind of chaos in a home, the child, to survive, has to shift to pay more attention to other people's moods and than their own. So they lose a lot of, they skip a lot of important developmental stages to develop that sense of self. So when we're looking at the love bombing stage of this type of relationship, because nobody gets into a relationship with somebody who is immediately an asshole.
Because you wouldn't, like, that's one of those things, and it's infuriating, but you hear it in every form of abuse, of like, well, if it was that bad, why did you stay? Like, okay, it wasn't that bad the whole time. Like,
right, but there were red flags the whole time.
Yes.
Going back to the love bombing and getting, like the whirlwind kind of thing, which has been romanticized in a lot of our exposure in media. But it is whirlwind is a red flag.
Yeah.
In So when you are experiencing that, you know, it's important to have kind of like preformed boundaries for if and when that happens. I would say, you know, if you're single and you're in the dating pool, there's a when that's going to happen. You're going to experience that. So when that does happen, you know, I've gotten caught up in it, you know, everyone's gotten caught up in it. And a lot of times we learn with hindsight. Even like in my marriage, we were talking about on our first date, after a kiss, I was kind of in the stage of like, I was like, let's DTR now. I'm getting impatient, define the relationship now. First kiss. All right. What is this?
All right, what's going on?
And so I remember what my ex said to me, and he said, as far as I'm concerned, we coexist. And I thought that was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. And so we were both lacking a good solid sense of self.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what love bombing can look like. It can look like that just immediate, connection. And it's fine to have that immediate connection with somebody, but that's where, that immediate connection in hindsight, let's slow that down.
Yeah.
It's hard to slow anything down that feels freaking amazing, so that's why, sometimes this is a common thing.
Yeah.
So the love bomb can also describe the rescuer victim dynamic, and that's usually how this starts. But both parties typically have a, set of pretty maladaptive coping skills already, that they use to feel whole. And so then both feel a need to be in control, but and it's usually the chemistry is felt between an internalizing person and an externalizing person. Okay. I did a training one time and it was literally called Codependents and Emotional Manipulators. And the guy said something about like, you could put those two people in a room of like 1,000 people at a New Year's Eve party, and they're going to find each other.
They will.
So I do believe in like your energy attracts like energy. Mm-hmm. And that's why sometimes when I'm helping people, men and women, work on how to not attract that energy, we're doing a lot of, self-healing so that your radar doesn't meet that frequency. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's not, I think a lot of people will hear like, you attract those people. And it sounds like something that you're like purposely doing. It's not.
No.
A lot of it is subconscious behaviors that you don't know, or even if you do know you're doing them, you don't know that they're a maladaptive coping skill. Like you're not aware of that.
Right. Because
that
even maladaptive coping skills work to an extent.
Yeah.
They come with pretty big consequences, but you wouldn't do them if they didn't work. Right. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of break down. So when you are in a relationship that starts with love bombing, there's kind of a universal quality to the different cycles that relationship will likely go through. Okay. One is just the drama triangle dynamic that we explain over and over again. But rescuer, victim, and persecutor we're doing like basically subcategories of that. All right, you can look at it that way. So don't quite define all the specific behaviors you might encounter that I would say count as psychological abuse.
Right.
All right. So there's cycling in that relationship as well, where you would see love bombing, and that's like too soon, too quick, overkill. And And then you would see something maybe called devaluation. So it started as a love bomb, but then you're noticing some, criticism creeping in that just feels hurtful. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
It feels hurtful, and it feels personal. That's because it is, and that's what it's intended to be. So again, like I said, to lower your self-esteem, a person who wants to feel in control of a relationship because of their own insecurities, that might feel really good to them that you feel insecure. So there's severity here. But when it gets to the psychological abuse category, we're talking more about someone who is intentional, more than likely. There's not a subconscious thing going on anymore. Because if it was on the subconscious and you went to like marriage counseling and the marriage counselor might point out some of these dynamics, if it's subconscious, that person might be more likely to be like, have like an aha moment and might be more amenable to taking advice about how to make some changes.
Yeah.
But when it reaches the level that it's intentional, there is no intent to change whatsoever, no matter what they say. So you kind of cycle through this devaluation, and what that might look like in behavior might be that a good example, I don't know why I always think of this, but I always think of like mother, I think her name's I can't remember, what's the mother in Rapunzel? Mother Gotham or something like that. What is it? Gothel. Okay. So there's like, when you watch Tangled, which I've seen a million times because I have 2 daughters. Yeah. She's a great example of devaluation in a very like trying to be sneaky. Yeah. Because she'll say things to Rapunzel that at first Rapunzel thinks she's being complimented, and then she's being, broken down in the same sentence, usually. Yeah. So that's the stage of the devaluation, where, there's just a lot of criticism that maybe is unnecessary, or if you go to that person for advice, they tend to give advice about how you're basically the one at fault. Yeah, you just nod your head. Can you relate to that?
Yeah. And I think it's kind of this, it's okay. We talk a lot about the confusion and how being in a state of constant confusion makes you more vulnerable to these behaviors. It essentially makes them more effective. It makes the psychological abuse more effective because you don't feel like you can tell left from right or up from down.
Yeah.
And with that confusion, you said, and obviously, you're right, it's 100%, and I'm with you. I think there's an important, like, almost like an addendum, like a little asterisk. You had said, if it was a subconscious thing versus if it was an intentional thing. People hear the word intentional, and I think they think of like a comic book villain, like rubbing their hands together and like, this is my master plan. No, like, I mean, yeah, like there are those cases. Of course there are those cases. But intentional doesn't have to mean like planned or like plot. Like intentional can just mean they genuinely believe what they're saying is right.
Yes.
Like that doesn't mean it is right. And that doesn't mean that it's a subconscious behavior. It's still intentional. And they're still not going to be open to receiving advice or taking responsibility or genuinely doing the work to get better because they think they're right. But it's still an intentional behavior.
Yeah. And I think they're right because they know they feel better about themselves when they do it.
Yeah. And so how could they be wrong?
Exactly.
Then how could they be wrong?
Yeah.
And it's a thing that I see a lot in conversation, that I hear a lot is like, no, but they genuinely believe this. I don't think it's intentional. They genuinely believe it. It is intentional.
Yeah. And when you've had relationship after relationship with this dynamic, and you have felt better along the way, then there is no opportunity for empathy to develop during that course of a lifetime.
No.
So the development of empathy in general has really been handicapped. and a lot of times you see a lack of empathy in the same people who have more externalizing ways of coping through control of other people. And you see like too much empathy in the ones that have more internalizing.
Yes. And it looks almost like what I've seen, just in, in a lot of different contexts, but it looks almost like giving them pass, like the never ending, like just like well of chances, like, no, it's okay,
Yeah.
but it's okay, but it's okay.
Well, and also because you tend to like, if you've got too much empathy, then in relation to the drama triangle, you're seeing people as victims who are not victims.
Yes. Yeah, you are. And it's so hard. Okay, I'm like snacking over here,
I can
and
see that. You're making me hungry.
I'm so sorry. Would you like some Heath bar? I can give it to you.
Heath bar. I'm gonna go with Twix instead.
Oh, Twix is so good.
Twix and York peppermint patties are my candy aisle weakness.
Yeah, I do love a York peppermint patty. I really love an Andes mint too.
Well, I'm gonna make some brownies when we get done. Okay, so going back to this also just side notion of the empathy never got developed.
Yes.
There's, like most people, if they're in a relationship, whether it's a boyfriend or a spouse, there's an assumption of empathy, so that's kind of a hard realization at some point to realize that all along it was never there. But when you tend to be the one that has too much empathy, you also tend to have like zero compassion for yourself. So you have your own form of bottomed out empathy as well. More like a transference of empathy where like you get none and everybody else gets it. So this is just it's like the fertile breeding ground for psychological abuse to occur. Yeah. And for you on the receiving end of it to not really know it's happening. So moving on to like what it looks like when it does happening, we mentioned a few things. We mentioned some of the stages. We mentioned the devaluation. Another stage that is common is going to be what is called the discard stage. And this is probably one of the most painful ones.
Yeah, it is.
I would say it is the most painful.
Yeah.
Because usually it comes after the low sense of self that you already had has been bottomed out even more.
Yeah.
And this is where the complete confusion comes in, that you can see this one person who is capable of the love bombing and capable of the discarding, like you don't even matter.
Yeah.
So emotionally, that experience is, for lack of a better word, it's a freaking nightmare.
Yeah. It is.
And it can affect you, it affects you so much emotionally, it's going to affect you physically. This is where I've seen lots of folks, and myself, I can include myself in this, who have come out of some of these types of dynamics with chronic illness that I would bet my entire salary for a year on the fact that they would not have had that chronic illness if they had not been in this pattern, in this cycle of psychological abuse.
Yeah, I have a friend who has been having a lot of health issues recently, and I feel like a broken record, and it feels like this, like it feels like a form of dismissal, and I very much make a point to be like, definitely see a doctor. I am not a medical professional, and whatever you're feeling is absolutely real. It's important to remember that the effects of emotional, mental, psychological, verbal abuse, they don't just affect your mind, they do affect your body. And a lot of this sounds like symptoms of that, a physical manifestation of the effects of abuse. And it's terrifying because that's not something that can have tests run on in a doctor's office. Yeah. And you just kind of feel like,
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, I think a lot of doctors are coming to this conclusion. We could probably do a whole podcast on this, but I won't, just because I'm not a medical professional. But when you look at like autoimmune diseases and things like that, where your body's attacking itself, I just see so many like parallels with being under attack in your relationships too.
Yeah, like I prioritize for myself, and also now I'm in control of your schedule, so I get to prioritize
my schedule.
You.
Yeah. You're in control of it until I say, I changed my mind.
Until I get an email that says, don't hate me.
Like I did today. I remember that thing I said like an hour ago. I changed my mind.
Don't worry. I'll just send another email. It's all good.
Yeah.
But no, I make it a point to, I preach it for myself and for other people, that you have to make time to rest, real, genuine rest. Because if you don't, your body will do it for you. And that is,
or your body will pay the consequence for the lack of it.
Like it is something that you have to prioritize, and it'll feel foreign. And, you know, especially if you've been in this dynamic, and it's going to feel like selfish almost and greedy, but it's not. That's just like something your body needs to function.
Well, your gauge is broken on what selfishness is with. So,
like,
you know, we will, I think the next episode should really be about the, you know, like the elements of recovery from this. That would be a good like next episode for sure. So with that discard phase, you got the devaluation, proceeded it with the love bombing. So you've been discarded, and you'll have the feeling that it's over. You may have the feeling that your life is over, that your world is over. This is a really difficult phase to go through, so much to the point that you see a lot of like suicidality in this stage. You know, like you really feel like you have nothing to live for. And then what happens next is something called the Hoover stage. And
the Hoover stage.
The Hoover stage is using the word for a vacuum cleaner, because it's like a intense onslaught of sucking you back in. And it can't look the same as the love bomb stage, because they know that you know that they are capable of hurting you in a way that they never imagined. But the Hoover stage tactics are going to be to do things like minimize what they did. They may even flat out deny it.
Yeah.
This can get really bizarre, but yeah, they're flat out denying it. They may know your button, and so they know what to target in the Hoover stage to get you to loosen your boundaries. You know.
Yeah.
One common tactic here is also the time between the discard and the Hoover phase. I believe that can be really intentional, because if you try to Hoover too soon after the discard, you're less effective, because the other person might be like really mad. But if you think about like, you know, those kinds of, you know, maybe they start going to therapy and they start feeling better. That's when the Hoover stage happens.
Yeah.
When you're not feeling the immediate reaction of the discard phase.
It's the Hoover stage can be really, like in hindsight, can be comical. Earlier, I laughed and was kind of grinning when you said it can get bizarre. I have an ex who
shall not be named.
Every time I think of this, I laugh. So he cheated on me multiple times. And one time there was photographic evidence. There were physical pictures of him. It was very clearly him and this other woman. And I remember showing him these pictures, and then him just being like, that's not me. I'm like, how are you? This is so clearly you. What do you mean?
Makes you wonder how these people function in real life.
How do you walk through the world just being like, that's not me? Is it your little twin? Like, I don't.
And it's so bizarre, and our brains are wired to understand. when we're little, when we're old. They just want to understand something. And so when you see bizarre behavior like this, that looks like, denial in the face of evidence, your brain is going to try to understand it.
Yeah.
And your brain's going to try to use logic. But y'all, this is drama triangle land. Logic doesn't live here. Yeah. So there's some point where you just got to be like, that is the most bizarre thing I've ever had. And that makes total sense because you are a drama triangle person. Yeah.
Which, real quick, this is kind of a side little tangent, but because we did the episode on the roles, and it can be confusing for people. I know when I've explained it to people who have no idea what I'm talking about, specifically with these terms, they hear there are 3 roles: victim, rescuer, and persecutor. And they're thinking like, okay, these are actual roles that like people will legitimately feel. Like, no. They're perceptions. They're based completely on perception. They are not actual roles, and you don't get to choose the role that you're filling. Like, there's nothing you can do to control that. So you and I have talked, because I wanted a term to kind of like clarify that whenever we needed to, and we came up with the chaos core, which I love, and I think it's like so cheeky and fun. So the way that I've started thinking about it is that there's a meme, and there's 2 different versions of it. One of it is it's Spider-Man, but there's 2 Spider-Mans, and they're pointing at each other like, what? But you're. Yeah. And it's funny. And then there's a different one, is a screen grab from The Office, like the TV show The Office. And they have, I think it's like water or something, and they're just like what? That's more accurate as to what it is.
Yes.
It's more that where everyone is kind of in this heightened sense of like defensiveness and reactiveness and just dysregulation. And then the person who started it, who brings everybody into that, they are at the center. They are the chaos core. They are the person assigning the roles. It's not you. You don't get to decide if you're the victim, the rescuer, or the persecutor, because likely you will be all 3 at one point or another.
Well, you will definitely feel like all 3.
Oh, yeah.
But your feelings, if you feel like one of those roles, then you are one of those roles. And that means you are in drama triangle, and you're in the chaos core of the drama triangle. Yeah. And so when you look at it with those 2 kinds of concepts in place, this like it's perception and you're feeling that way, then a lot of us tend to take our feelings as facts. Feelings are not facts.
No.
And your feelings don't occur in isolation. They occur with beliefs and with actions. And so it's its own triangle of how you're dealing with feeling like one of those roles. And so the other term I wanted to bring up is the term reactive abuse.
Yeah.
So when you think about, you started out as the rescuer, and maybe you have all these great qualities of compassion and empathy for others, and non-judgmentalness and unconditional love. So those are all great qualities. I don't want anyone to get rid of.
Yeah.
But you kind of are erring on the side that you're not giving yourself that. And you get into this drama triangle relationship when you feel like you've done everything right, but now you're the bad guy. So the perception is that you're the persecutor. But when it comes to psychological abuse, that one's, like I said, it's so severe and it's so cruel that there's some survival skills needed to survive that situation. You'll get into a self-protection mode, and it may look like another form of psychological abuse. It may look like emotional or verbal abuse. It may even look like physical abuse. And well, now the kind of like chaos core person can really, work with that.
Yep.
And it gets very confusing at that stage to figure out, who's the chaos core. Now you don't know. And the one that technically is the core is going to make you think you're the core.
Yeah.
So that's when it gets really mess. A good example of this, because I follow a lot of therapists on Instagram and stuff. And during the time of the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, this was a hot topic of conversation among therapists, just kind of observing from the outside. And I think it was kind of a good example of psychological abuse happening and reactive abuse happening. I'm not going to say who's who. I'm not going to weigh in on that. But it's no different than you've just been pushed into a corner enough times that you lash out, basically. But it doesn't mean that you were ever driving the bus.
Right.
Yeah.
You can only bend so far until you break.
Right. But what the psychological abuse is then going to use, how they're going to use that is going to be a lot of gaslighting, because now they've got some tangible things that have happened that they can say, well, look what you did. You are no different.
Yeah.
But honey, you are different. Okay. You're just trying to survive a highly toxic environment.
Yes.
And if you were to be trying to heal in that environment, it might be dangerous. It very well could be dangerous on different levels, whether it's you're not emotionally safe. You likely may not be physically safe. You may not be sexually safe.
Yeah.
So your brain kind of automatically knows when it's in that kind of situation that choosing reactive abuse is going to keep you safer, because it is a trauma. Reactive abuse is a trauma response.
Yeah.
And a trauma response is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Okay. And our brains are wired to automatically choose in the moment the one that it thinks we're going to be most successful at in terms of self-protection. So if you've been a fawner for most of that relationship and that just created more abuse, you will slowly evolve into a fight response because your brain's figured out fawning doesn't work. Let's see if fighting works. So there's a whole other kind of trauma response brain element going on to survive this that you're not even aware of, and you don't really have a whole lot of control of because you're not aware. I mean, I would go so far, based on the brain scans that we have and all the new knowledge we have about how this affects your brain, we could call it brain damage.
Yeah. That
you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And so that's where that mental fog comes from. And the mental fog is what makes people start to feel like they're the crazy one. They cannot make sense of this. There's no sense to be made. That's why. And that mental fog also detaches you from actual solutions. So this is where you really, really need somebody that understands this dynamic to help you start to see more clearly what solutions may look like for you. And those solutions have to prioritize safety too, because if not to get too super heavy and sad, but when you read an article about a murder suicide that happened, you're reading an article about a drama triangle and severe psychological abuse and other types of abuse. And the end result of the murder suicide is the sides of the coin that we just talked about, the internalizing way of coping, or the internalizing perception and the externalizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you go to any kind of general mental health evaluation, it's required that you are asked about, do you want to hurt yourself or do you want to hurt others? And the reason why both are always asked is because they are also two sides of the same coin.
Yes, they are.
you either, feel so bad, your situation so bad that you want to hurt yourself, or your situation so bad that you want to hurt others to feel better. Same thing. And so that's why you see this sometimes when someone's tried to leave, is maybe that person that they're trying to leave, that was kind of the chaos poor person, got to that point of emptiness. So it's heavy, it's severe, it's epidemic, it's a lot to take in. I know
it's but I don't think it's something that obviously shouldn't be minimized, but specifically in this dynamic, because it does, you see a lot of murder suicides, you see a lot of spousal abuse. You also see, and this is the thing that I don't think people kind of understand and know to equate to those things, you see a lot of threats of suicide. And people understand and they know, like, hey, if you get in a fight and your partner immediately starts threatening that they're going to commit suicide, they're planning to kill themselves, like, that's not good. That's a sign of very, very intense toxicity and just abuse, just overall abuse in that relationship. It's not okay. But I don't think people realize that that is on the same level. They're on the same level as wanting to hurt somebody else.
Yeah. And no matter how much active intention is behind that statement, in that this kind of situation, especially if it comes up regularly.
Yeah.
And there's not been any other attempts, or it's never gotten to severe, it's just been that statement over and over again, then it's also a way to pull you back in the drama triangle as a, hey, I'm a victim, I'm suicidal, and the only person that will keep me from doing that is you, my rescuer.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's a way to throw that lasso and reel you back in, because
and it may not be very intentional, because like I said, when the chaos core person starts to feel a very significant loss of control, that's a loss of their soul, because they have usurped yours.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Dementors in Harry Potter. They have already been sucking your soul.
Yeah.
And they are starving if you remove their source.
Yeah.
So that desperation of starving will make them actually feel suicidal.
Yeah. And another way to kind of think of it, if that isn't making sense for some people, is like, so we talked about a sense of self and how they will attack your sense of self. The reason they're able to do that so effectively is because normally they lack a sense of self. They don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
They see yours and it's reflected. And that's why it can feel so intense and so like passionate and so much chemistry and so like a whirlwind.
Yeah.
Because they're reflecting your behaviors back to you. So it feels familiar.
I mean, that's in and of itself is like a form of psychological abuse, I would say, is mimicking that they're just like you. And the reason why it's psychological abuse is that they know they're not just like you, but they're tricking you into thinking you are. They are.
Yeah. And it's just, it's so hard. And so you make that connection, you feel that passion, you feel that chemistry. Let's say you're in a committed relationship, a long-term committed relationship. Let's say you're married to this person, it's somebody that you have a very deep connection with. And then that person that you love so much and you think is just like you says, I'm going to kill myself if you leave. You're not going to leave because you are capable of empathy. So you feel an obligation to stay so that they don't hurt themselves. Because of course you take that seriously. Because you would never make that threat if it wasn't serious. You would never do that.
Right.
But they would.
Yeah.
And that's the
important. And you use the word obligation. And I think we mentioned this before, that if you want to know if you're being manipulated, do an inventory of fog. Am I feeling fear, obligation, or guilt?
Oh, I'm writing that down. I like it. I know we've talked about it before, but I don't think I ever connected that actually is like, I don't think
there's a great book to dive deeper into that I recommend to a lot of people. It's called Emotional Blackmail by Susan Forward. So we'll put that in the show notes too. But I definitely don't want to end on a super heavy note. I don't want to end on without some kind of solution and what to look forward to.
Yeah.
Because these are situations that you can successfully recover from and you can get out of. You always, if you're in this situation and you're hearing psychological abuse in the different ways that we're describing it. And one thing I left out, but this was something I didn't even realize until recently when I was recovering from my divorce in the early years, is that lying is a form of psychological abuse. I was like, say what?
We talked about that our first dinner we had when we were talking about coming to work with you.
Yeah.
We talked about that.
It blew my mind.
It blew my mind at that dinner.
Yes, but the reason given, I had like a one-on-one kind of consultation, and they were saying that basically they are intentionally distorting your reality.
Yeah.
So when it happens in the context of a marriage or a partnership, imagine your partner deciding the life that my partner thinks they're living. I'm going to trick them into thinking it's something that it's not.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I was like, I mean, this is everything. Just knowing that knowledge was like super healing and super, super validating for me. So again, it doesn't have to look as creative as the other ones. It could just be lying. But just to kind of like wrap this up, I want to point out that when you have these aha moments and you realize that this may be happening to you, you don't automatically feel better.
No.
It's a loss.
Yeah.
And so grief is what comes after loss. And the type of grieving can be equivalent to the grieving you would feel with an actual death. And so this type of loss you're going to feel that. And it's going to come in waves. If you feel like there's any kind of risk to your safety or your children's safety to exit this relationship, even if your partner has never laid a hand on you, has never even gotten in your personal space too far, this is still abusive. And there's still a risk. Abuse doesn't get better on its own. And it's a type of thing that can get worse and worse and get an increase in severity. So you qualify for calling a domestic violence hotline.
Yeah.
Don't ever, indicate, don't ever feel like because you weren't hit that you don't qualify. 100% you qualify. So make that your first call. And they've got, depending on where you're at, if you call a national one, they can direct you to a local one, depending on all the different types of services that your local one provides. One of the main things they provide is something called a victim advocate. And that can just somebody you talk to. You don't have to make any decisions, but they can at least coach you through a safety plan that can help you work towards leaving that situation if you feel like there's a risk to safety. And then at the same time, if you don't feel like there's a risk to safety, then also still just consult a therapist that understands this dynamic. It's okay to interview therapists before you decide on one. And ask them ask them if they've heard of the podcast. They probably haven't, but one day
Probably
maybe they will say,
okay.
yeah, totally heard of it. Or just ask them, just kind of like interview questions, like ask them what their definition of psychological abuse is.
That's a big one.
Yeah. See
And
if they understand the nuances.
I mean, that's a big one. If they don't fundamentally understand the difference between psychological abuse, verbal abuse, mental abuse, and emotional abuse,
Mm-hmm.
that's something to, take and consider, because that is, there's a difference there, and it's an important one. And
yeah, I mean, like any professional, it's totally okay to want to ask them some vetting questions before agreeing to place your trust in them. Never put blind trust in any professional. It's no different than the love bombing we talked about before. Trust is a process and it needs to be earned. So don't hesitate to do that. I guess my main point here is don't do it alone. If you've experienced this and you think that you're ready for a divorce, you're ready to take that step, you may think that your very next call needs to be to an attorney.
No.
But
Oh.
an attorney's going to want you to make some lifelong concrete decisions pretty soon after you consult with them. And remember that you are in an active trauma situation. You are fresh out of it and you are still having trauma symptoms probably. You still have brain fog probably. You're still in a very, very vulnerable and fragile state. And nobody's going to suggest that you make lifelong decisions in that state. For that reason, I've created a course for you, and it's called Know Your Divorce Drama. And the way I've designed this course, we're doing pre-sales right now. It's not quite ready to launch, but the way I'm doing it is to give you a more affordable first investment in your future. And it is going to help guide you through a lot of the things that we talk about, but also give you some really tangible ways to work through this brain fog and understand what's happening to you emotionally and physically before you make that next step to call the attorney. It'll also include advice specifically on what types of things that you may want to ask for when it comes to custody or financials or parenting plans, things like that. So when I think about when I first saw an attorney and the questions he asked, I wanted to be ready to answer those questions because I just wanted this to be over with because of my anxiety. But it was never his job to help me work through that anxiety to be ready to answer those questions. So that's why I've created this course. I wish I had had this course for myself when I went through this process. So we'll have some information in the show notes on that. But you can also access it pretty easily at our nodivorcedrama.com /training.
Yep. And they're really, we have the one for clients. We also have one for mental health professionals, and we have one for attorneys who have no idea what it is that we're talking about and why, some clients might be hesitant or might have more questions, might not know what's happening when they're expected to just jump in.
Yeah, because I mean, the certification course for mental health therapist is a new thing. No one has it. There's no certification. Wouldn't it be great though if you were going through a divorce and child custody and you could ask a therapist, hey, are you certified in this?
Yeah. Are you
certified? That's the goal that we're working towards, is that more and more therapists have the knowledge and there's proof of the knowledge rather than just saying, oh yeah, I know how to handle this.
Like, oh
they
yeah,
may not.
Sure.
Yeah. Same thing with attorneys. I mean, attorneys become attorneys because they love logic.
Logic doesn't live here.
But logic doesn't live here. And so when you're divorcing a psychologically abusive person and you use logic to make your decisions, no.
It's not going to work.
Dumpster fire.
It's going to be so bad. Congratulations. Now you're in the triangle too.
Yeah. And so I really want to help attorneys have this set of knowledge for these types of cases, because you've got to handle them differently.
Yeah. I mean, you've told me horror stories. I've experienced horror stories. It's something that is needed. It's something that really is genuinely
Yeah.
needed. And, that's kind of where your, passion for it sprouted from. And then that's where mine also sprouted from, is realizing that these were things that, I've never been divorced, but my parents divorced when I was a teenager. If I had had access to these things, I would be a completely different person. And
right. Same. I didn't have access to them. And, just one inherent flaw in the system of making these types of decisions for children is that, in the legal superior family court world, there's a list in every state of what is considered best interest of children, but there is not a list of how to implement those with best practices.
Yeah.
And so when I stumbled upon that gap, I was like, not on my watch.
No. Which
kind of my life mantra. And so that's where I want to move this field towards through these trainings. And so for attorneys, they not only understand best interest, they understand how to sift through recommendations to determine what is best practices for meeting these children's needs.
Yeah. Which, Courtney, your kind of origin story for how you got here and how you started founding everything that you've done up till now is really, really amazing. And we do have a YouTube channel on the Divorce Resource Center of Georgia YouTube page. I do think I'm going to go ahead, upload that again to the podcast page. Because it's a really amazing story. And I think it's something that's worth taking a listen to. Maybe we'll do a podcast episode on it, and you can tell that story here.
I would like that. Yeah, that's a very special story. And funny enough, in the morning, I'm doing a virtual presentation for some therapy. I got invited to a virtual presentation for a group practice of therapists about Divorce Resource Center. And I'm going to show them that video.
Amazing. I think that was the first video that I pretty majorly edited and produced for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard story to tell because it's about sexual abuse. It's about incest. I mean, it's a tough one. It was a doozy, but it really was the inspiration for everything I do.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And the work we do is hard work, but it's good work. And of being your partner in this, it's pretty amazing. So
thank you.
All right.
I love having you. And, we both trusted our instincts coming together.
Really
Hey, this is kind of proof that why that's an important thing to do is trust your instinct.
Yes. Thanks. Okay. Any last thoughts before we wrap up and say our goodbyes?
So just I think that, if you heard this episode and you feel a little left hanging, it won't be for long. I mean, our next episode will be much more solution oriented and help guide you through some more of these specifics. But again, if you want more specifics or you want more one-on-one support, you can look at the trainings that we suggested, because they do come with one-on-one sessions with me specific to your situation. I think the great place to wrap up is just to remember that your greatest love story is the one with yourself.
And that's true. And it is. Don't forget to follow us on social media. You guys, where we are. They'll all be linked in the show notes. I'm also going to link our playlist in there now, so that you can go ahead, click on that, take a listen. Especially because this was a heavier episode, but that's the reality of what it is that we do, of our profession. So thank you so much for joining me again, Courtney. This is so much fun. I will see you next week, and I will be back in the feeds here soon. So that'll be pretty great.
Yeah. I'm excited to keep going with this. Sorry for the long break, but guys, it was the holidays.
It was the holidays. Things were crazy. I was working 2 jobs. Now I'm not. So
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what I was doing, but I was in my own brain fog for non-psychological abuse reasons.
yes. Yeah. Important differentiation there. Important one. All right, Courtney. We'll wrap it up.
All right. See y'all next time.
Bye.
Hey, it's Liv. Thanks for listening. While you're here, don't forget to follow us on social media to keep up with all the behind the scenes of the podcast, as well as some awesome bonus material from me and Courtney about what it is we do when we're not recording. You can find us at KDD_pod on Instagram, No Divorce Pod on Twitter, No Divorce Drama on TikTok, and just search No Divorce Drama the podcast on Facebook. See you there.